I reckon we kind of kick off.
Yep, that sounds good. Yeah.
What's the kind of like problematic? What is Forby as a response to that?
Yeah.
And then why are we grappling with this? And then, what are we grappling with? And then we'll move forward.
From my perspective, corporate structures are built on exploitive models. Like the Dutch East India Company, the first publicly traded company, was a pirate organization. I love this quote. The plantations of the past are the corporations of the present. The slavery auction blocks are the stock exchanges. Trade routes are the supply chains. The overseer is now the CEO. The language has changed, but the rhythm of extraction has remained the same. Currency of power flows up in one direction, upward and outward, away from the many into the hands of the few. Alongside that, we also have to really realize that every tool we use, every meal we eat, every home, clothing, medicine, everything we use relies on the efficiency, ruthless efficiency at times of and scale of modern corporations. And so there's this unprecedented abundance. It's at a cost, but there's this kind of function which is important, which is the efficiency and the power of coordination that we see in corporations. And so without corporations, making all of these things, I'm guessing that 7.5 billion people would die. That's what it looks like to me. That we'd have people around, clustered around, organic, permaculture farms here and there, and everyone else would be eating each other, just something terrible if the supply chains were to collapse. So the purpose of Forby is to kind of bring power to wisdom, bring power to transparent coordination. And so, and to do it in a way that empowers the many, that empowers people with a different vision, makes it easier to coordinate and easier to make good decisions to coordinate around the multipolar traps. So to make decisions that are hard to make because they may not be as profitable, but if we're very creative around it, we can find ways to avoid those multipolar traps, the pollution and the exploitation, all of those things. So that's the vision of Forby. It's to bring that efficiency to people with wisdom and care. So now it's just a matter of how do we do it in a way that is likely to open the window of possibility that people can actually see a way that we could coordinate at scale in a more transparent and wise way. And so the question is, can we do that with open source? Can we do that in a nonprofit? Is that enough of an intro?
Yeah. The only thing I would kind of add, the way that we go about trying to make sense of where we've come from, who we are, who we have the collective potential to be, the directions that we might most like to pursue based on very wide boundary thinking, that's like a meta problem. It's a problem of problems, and that's a key driver of the symptoms of the meta crisis. And I think Forby, in its attempt to bring its theory of the universality of governance into very practical realms, from households through to intergovernmental cooperation, is sort of it's a response to that meta problem. And what Sam and I have been grappling with is, all right, so we're pretty sure that this truly matters. Like, this is something that has to be done. Not just like lots of people are going to try and like we want to participate in that attempt to progress how we effectively and normatively and thoughtfully and equitably coordinate. But we're also considerate of, well, the context that we find ourselves in. There are these vast power imbalances. There are certain dynamics.
Incentive landscapes.
Exactly, incentive landscapes. There are certain dynamics that mean certain organizational models are far more likely to be supported than others. And so what we've found through this, we were enacting a sort of ethical decision-making process internally, and we found, all right, well, moving in a certain direction is much more aligned to our values, but that comes into conflict with sort of I think very justifiable hypotheses we have about what might be the most efficient and more importantly, effective pathways forward towards many, many people benefiting from such approaches to collective governance. And in this process, in opening up this decision-making process and this sense-making process, we're trying to figure out, is it possible for us to design an organizational structure that really does align to those values whilst being highly effective? And that's the tension. Yeah, and part of this opening up this process to whatever extent we have is attempting to demonstrate some of the underlying practices of governance that Forby is really built on, ourselves. And in startup language, is sort of dog fooding.
I'll just also add a little bit of preface, and then we'll jump right in. Is just that we're not intending to be a conventional for-profit company. We have a B Corp structure and a nonprofit structure, and so we want to sort of decide how to manage those. But even the for-profit structure, the B Corp, would be using the Forby governance community model, and so that kind of makes. Hey Val, great to have you here. Val's one of the coordinators from MetaGovs. It's very nice to have you here. Thank you. So normally governance walks lockstep with investment. So governance community model creates a cooperative model where the investors are one slice of the governance pie. And then you also have other slices that you can have optionally, like the users of the platform or your customers or your suppliers or something like that, employees. And in our case, we're also including a board of trustees or people who are elected based on their commitment to the values of the company and their awareness of the impact of technology on society. And so these people would represent the values and the heart of the organization. And so they would propose and vote for things that, are in alignment with that. The investors also are there proposing and voting for things that will keep the company alive financially. So they want investment, so they're going to propose and vote for things that support that. The employees will make it a better organization to work in, and the users will make it a better platform altogether. And so the dynamic model allows so that when the profit margins are in the right range, so within a decided range, then the ratios are kind of at their defaults. But if the company is really doing well financially, then the investor slice of the governance pie shrinks, and the users and the board of directors, employees get more say. And when the company is in financial difficulty, then the investor slice of the governance pie increases. And so people who are going to propose and vote for things that will keep the company alive financially get more say during those times. And that would be tied directly to the quarterly earnings report. And so that way you have the right people empowered at the right times, during the seasons of the company growth and that kind of thing. In, early days when there isn't any profitability, having investors say more, I think, is reasonable. And when things are starting to get more profitable, having them say a lot less, I think, is also. So that model is already sort of in place, and it's enabled by the technology that Forby has developed. So, but that aside, for me, there are a lot of really good solutions in the space of for-profit, nonprofit, including models that combine those, and I'm very open to those. For me, the biggest question has to do with open source and closed source, and I'm really on the fence about that. And so I'm hoping we can focus quite a bit on that today. And I really want to hear everyone's thoughts and concerns, and we've kind of captured quite a few thoughts from the previous session. Yeah, so that's all I have to say. Nate, if you want to jump in and.
Yeah, and this might seem obvious, but this whole thing is a living process. Even the community governance model that Sam's talking about, there's a sort of meta, self-reflective nature to the whole thing, organizational metacognition to some extent, if you will, and it should be learning through these different processes and practices, and therefore I suppose everything that is described now is kind of like best current guess that is being operationalized to a greater or lesser extent. And then there's this kind of like I don't know, learning architecture that should help the whole thing continually evolve, hopefully for the better.
Yeah, that's been a big part of the work that we've been doing with Nate, is to have an ethical process be part of the ongoing decision-making processes within Forby. So yeah, so this is like not just a one and done thing. This is like part of an ongoing consideration that we're hoping to be able to have, through every stage of Forby's development. But it's great to have you guys here. I mentioned this before, but I want to thank you guys for being here and for being part of this conversation. And I think there's going to be some little badge that we're going to give everybody if you're a user of Forby, where it's like a founding framer kind of badge, just to appreciate you for taking your own time to be here and contribute to the conversation. So it's not much, but it's kind of what I can do at the moment. So thank you for that. Yeah, I kind of want to just sort of close that. One of the big concerns about scaling has to do with the access to capital. And so having a nonprofit means that you're dependent on the good graces of donors. And I just don't see that as a great model. It's not 100% true, but it's partially true. And I know that, if a company is not looking to be profitable, capital is less likely to flow towards it. So that's my perspective on that. And there are some creative models that I'm very open to, still having part of the company owned by the nonprofit and those types of things. And I think we've got a really good and creative response to the question of enshittification, the question of misalignment with values and the two masters conundrum. So I want to just, and we can revisit that, but I'd really like to jump into the open source, closed source. I'm still really struggling with this open source, closed source thing, and I really want to go open source. I just need to brainstorm a bit further, like just figure out how it can serve the ultimate purpose of opening the Overton window, like really permeating the culture, expanding to the point where it becomes a household name. The idea of transparent governance becomes something that people think could be actually possible, because right now it's not something that people think is possible. And so for us to do that, we have to do it in a way that's like kind of follows the playbook, I think, like the playbook of every other tool that's ever shifted the conscious, like Facebook and Twitter and and all those other ones. And that's the thinking I'm having, but I'm very open to, I'd love to break that mold also.
I was surprised last time when you brought up the example of Polis starting out closed source, then moving to open source. I didn't realize there were case studies of code bases doing that, so that was interesting to me.
Yeah, well, Hilo also was originally a closed source for-profit thing, and then they just gave it to the Terran Collective or sold it or something, and exited to open source, and In the discussions I've had with people, I've had people say, well, I don't really want to be part of Forby. I just want to use your code. And when you make it open source, I'm going to just fork it and create my own branch of it and use it to do the same thing you're doing, which is create a world party and crowdsource the development of a platform built in that kind of transparent and collaborative crowdsourced way. And that's great in a way, but it also seems to me that it would reduce the likelihood that we would develop a critical mass. And it's that network effect that allows things like Facebook and Twitter to be as influential in society as they are. Like I think my biggest concern is that it would fragment the network effect, and it would keep a critical mass from forming. So
Henrik, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just like, because I was in the last conversation as well, just like bridging over, and because I'm sitting with the same question. So recording Hendrik calling in from a bit north of Lisbon, part of Chrome One. We're collaborating with Sam, like building our whole thing is like, or my thing is overall is like, how do we create an operating system for a polycentric regenerative venture ecosystem? Like, how do you create? And one of the biggest thing there is, how do we not lock capital? But if you don't want to lock capital, and that, I'm not just like financial capital, human capital, intellectual capital, the big process we're in for me in that movement is by fractionalizing it, is to understand not everything is just one thing. And different parts can express themselves differently in context. Especially governance is highly contextual. It meets culture moment. Not every organizational structure will work in every culture moment. I worked with organizations that work in a highly dependent economic structure where employees say, I rather have a clear paycheck by the end of the month than getting more equity in voting. Don't give me more choice, just give me reliability with money. We tried it, didn't work because the cultural context didn't allow for that freedom to operate, right? So governance is a highly contextual thing. But like, I don't want to go, like my steer is this organizational design piece, but I just wanted to give context for who I am and
thank you for that, Hendrik.
My question for you, Sam, is what is the thing that is open source or not? Because Forby as it is right now is a brand. There's a brand. Then you have a specific UI. Then you have a governance protocol, like an architecture of how governance could work. Because spreading, if you want to spread, be WordPress. WordPress operates 40% of all websites on the planet, and it's completely open source, but it's governed by a foundation. But the people who started WordPress make money because they have a consultancy that is a for-profit organization that uses the open source to help people build, and they build most of the plugins that you pay for that are very successful were built by the people who started WordPress. And that is a consultancy that is owned, and like some of the plugins are owned by those people. So
it's a good model.
So WordPress, Linux, a lot of they are open source, but then it says the most useful code is open source, and then it spreads like wildfire, but then really make it fit to, I want my website to look and work for me. I want to use my UI plugin. I want to use MailChimp, or you use like a different email program. I want to use the thing that I want to use. I want to have enough freedom versus you coming and saying you need to be Facebook, right? Like, but Facebook and all of these social media are more in the intention game. Their competitors are the media centers more than the organizational governance. The reasons organization use social media is to engage customers and get customer feedback and for marketing. But beyond that, they're not used for, and there's a lot of decision making in there. Like some really good brands use social media to engage customers and get voices and insight into how
And the
to
Arab
improve.
Spring and things like that. There
So
have been
that is a
movements
form
on,
of power, right? It is
yeah.
how do you work with your customers in order to improve the product? And if you give them a lot of leeway there, but that doesn't mean they need to be part of the decision making of how do we allocate our budgets and what's our largest strategy and which direction we're going. Right. So so what is it like I'm deep looping over, and I agree that with you, Nat, these things are entangled, but I would really say, what is that thing that struggles you for open source? Because what you say, if you want to spread like wildfire, open source spreads like wildfire. It gets most human capital for the least financial capital investment. People gift their time and energy to build the thing because they believe in it. That's how most open source communities grow fast, because you get a lot of coders that are excited about this idea, and then they execute on it and you don't pay them. You also don't get paid, but it spreads like wildfire. Grows usually way faster than any for-profit piece, like all the freemium models of the other platforms as well. So what is the thing that you struggle with that's open source or closed source?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so again, it has to do, so there's two things. One is definitely like the monetization thing, and I think there are good solutions to that. As you mentioned, Ghost, and there's many of these organizations that have figured that out. WordPress, a great example. And then there's also this desire to create a network effect, to create a critical mass within Forby itself, where people are able to come together to coordinate at the scales, so at the world scale and at the nation and the city and the state and the neighborhood and the bioregion and the watershed and those things. So I'm just worried that people will fork it and use it for their own small purpose, and that would sort of dilute the effort to have people engaging at the various scales.
I'm sort of feeling a both and type sensation arising within me here, because for look, again, if our frame of the meta problem of kind of like collective coordination failure and all of the facets, variables, the broader context that feeds into that is kind of like useful enough, and providing something like a really solid response to that is, again, valid enough. So like a million different assumptions, but like it's assumptions all the way down to some extent. But then I'm feeling the tension. Like, okay, so someone forks, uses it in their own context, etc., etc. But and there's a bunch of reasons why that might be quote unquote good. I'm just wondering, is there a way to kind of like, the Dark Matter Lab sort of frame it as like, I don't know, like maximize optionality or whatever. And this is maybe to Henrik's point on freedom to some extent. But like, is there a way to sort of maximize optionality so that in that kind of like agent arena sense, as in who the folks are that want to do the governance, in the context within which they want to do it, they can truly do it in a way that's unique to them, that benefits from the underlying work behind Forby? Yeah. And then is there a way for that then to speak back, right, and inform these attempt to coordinate across contexts and scales? Because it's kind of like, but this is also the other thing. It's we're not talking, one of the challenges here I think we have is sort of like spatio-temporally. Like what we're talking about here is very big picture and is going to take time, no matter how fast it grows. And some type of like socio-technical architecture for governance across scales, like it's going to take years, right? Years and years. And so I'm wondering, is there, if we were to, not to be like overly reductive or overly linear, but if we were to think of something like a critical path, recognizing that's insufficient in sort of like complex system dynamics, but just for the sake of simplicity here, what might some sort of steps look like? And like what are maybe those early steps that need to be taken in order for that pathway to be kind of like long-term valid? Because it almost feels like there is some healthy kind of like tension between enabling people to govern with the principle of specificity, like in their unique context, as Hendrik put it. Like that's one thing, but enabling that to then speak up to this higher level kind of, you know what I mean? Like they're of course not diametrically opposed, but they're also quite different in important ways. And which one are we more, because like we can't do both at the start. We're going to have to pick sort of like a direction and then really deliver on that direction, so that whatever we are delivering is far more valuable than what people are currently doing today, like way more valuable than what people are currently doing today, and they have to be stoked about it, and they have to be, you know what I mean? And then there's gonna anyways.
I mean, I think that there are both and solutions available, like for example using like AT protocol, or the one that Mastodon uses, ActivityPub, to enable people who create their own instances of Forby to have connection to the hub groups. Just sort of a matter of like what's the most efficient pathway to get from A to B. And I really like what Hendrik said about increasing the likelihood of dispersion and awareness through open sourcing. Like there is a real cold start problem here, in that I don't know if anybody's going to even have any interest in using it at all, but maybe that could be increased, dramatically by open source developing communities and that kind of thing. So it's a very valid point, and that there may be ways to solve the problem of a dispersion, even in the face of open source.
I have a question. So to me, I'm not super familiar with the Mastodon model, so I'm just speaking from my own experience with my open source development. So my assumption is that your small scale users are not going to want to go through the effort to fork it. They're just going to want to use your tool. And the large scale users are the ones who are most likely to get funding from. Those are the ones who are going to have the incentive to fork it and use the resources to spin up their own instance. I feel like if from just the small scale users alone, you're going to get a large community on your instance. And I'm curious if there's benefits on Forby for the large scale users. Do the large scale users benefit from being on the same instance as like the rest of the community? Are there extra benefits they get from intersecting with that, or would you see the large scale users like kind of just being isolated from the rest of them, being fine with that?
It's a good question. I think the users in the large-scale communities would have the benefit of the community and the network. But I think the companies that would want to spin this up for whatever reason would probably not want those benefits to be available. Like they would want their employees to have their account just to focus on the work or the process that they're doing within their company, and not be engaging in network activities. I don't know. I don't know what benefits.
But that's just to add really quickly, isn't that the problem that we have with most of these contexts today, as in, so big corporation forks open source software, i.e. benefiting from collective effort, and then privatizes the gains from that whole process and delivers sweet FA back into the community like after the fact, you know what I mean? So you get these really unhealthy dynamics where they're just continuing the whole like privatized gain, socialized loss type of thing. And I wonder, if that's... Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, just sorry to interrupt you there. I think there's two parts of that. I mean, one is certainly that if Facebook or Twitter or something wanted to take this code and use their own network to develop their own version of it, or integrate it with their own software or whatever, it would effectively destroy Forby, make it irrelevant when it comes to being an actual networked product. But on the other hand, it would, if it was open source, they would contribute to the code, and that code, usually companies like that work on Linux and Apache and all those things, they because it's open source, they add to the value of the base code typically. So,
and that can be required based on the license you pick, is the other thing.
Exactly.
But that also goes back to what's your intent and the main driver. I don't like the word purpose too much there, but like the essence of what for you Forby is about. Because I'm coming in and I met you as Forby for me is a tool that I use, and if it's a tool, then you're not the network. You can build a network around a tool, but you're primarily a tool. Or you say your protocol, a philosophy, like it's more around the philosophy and the protocol of governance, and that is what it's around spreading. Then If I would be in your shoes, I would celebrate Facebook taking the protocol, because if I take the protocol, that means they are shifting towards that kind of decision making, or enable that kind of decision making in 1 billion, with 1 billion people. That's instant scale for the protocol. For the ego around it's Forby and it's that will not scale. But if your essence is around making this kind of governance protocol more global, then being piggybacked by these systems is super powerful. Like we're talking, coming out of the data sovereignty model, that's one of the things. Like if any of the global players adopts something like Solid and uses a data protocol that incentivizes people's private data is hosted with them, and they would make it an option, that would be amazing. We're actually very pro that in that community. It's completely counterintuitive because it destroys the entire revenue model, because all of a sudden the data is owned by the user and not by the company, and that's why it's free, because they monetize your data, our data, and make billions with it instead of us making money with it. So they wouldn't come and you switch that data protocol unless there's social pressures, etc. But that's the intent there, right? It's about the protocol is about enabling data stored with the user, not somewhere there. If Forby is around governance protocol and like enabling a plug and play mechanism for finding the right decision making mechanism for the parts of your community to make it easier for people to engage, then you're a tool first, and then you can build a network around the tool, or you can use. You said cold start problem. I don't know if you read the book. Like what?
Yeah, just finished it.
Then your atomic network is not about a network of the network effect doesn't come out becoming a social network. It's about you like Dropbox. You want to be used, and you create a network effect by people using it privately, and that's why they bring it in their company. That's how Dropbox grew, right?
Yeah.
It was like file sharing needs to be easier, and I use it privately and bring it there. But that strategy is you start with families first, and because everybody uses it in their family, I don't know if that's actually a use case where a lot of family would love to use a tool like this.
Yeah.
It's a hypothesis, then that's your starting point, and then you grow into that. Or you say, no, it's actually, that's then what's your atomic network? What's the smallest network, and in which context are you looking at that? We're diverging still very much, and I'm also still diverging, but I need to understand what for you the Forby essence is, what you want to spread. That's ultimately what it comes down to for me, because there's no way in code it will not be copied or duplicated or stolen if it is more effective. It will happen, either ethically or unethically. Welcome to the world as it is right now. It will take place.
Yeah.
And I was just going to add to that really quickly. What's nice here is this is a bridge between sort of like mission, vision, purpose, however you define those things, strategy, like what is your strategy and planning are often conflated. I mean, strategy here, like what's your actual theory, like what's Forby's theory. And I think in this case, that to some extent, there's a theory of change sort of piece that has to inform what that organizational theory is. And then obviously like plans and stuff can come off the back of that. But I think that's really nice because it forces the question like, all right, what is the theory? What is the strategy? Like, how is this thing going to move forward? Like, what are those hypotheses? What is that integrated set of choices? Yeah, I like that. And I think if that is clarified, then it should perhaps ease some of these tensions because it makes one of the directions or whatever it is a little bit more sensible than the others.
Yeah, no, actually, I like one of the things you said, which is like, hey, if Twitter decided that it wanted to use this protocol, and then that would open the Overton window even further with the network that they have. And I think that's a really valuable point. And the counter that I have to that is not a pretty one, which is like, okay, but I've invested 4 years of my life and, like $100,000 into building this thing, and, Twitter is going to just take it over. And they're going to use their advertising model on it. They'll take the source and like pervert it to their own purposes, and they won't have a governance community model on top of it. And they'll just have their standard operating corporations. Like it's a bit of a mix of things, a conflation of like personal interest and disdain for the way these companies run themselves and those types of things that drives me a little bit in the other direction in relationship to that. But I think if there is the ability for Twitter to take this on and integrate the concept, like they wouldn't really need my code to do it. Like they have better developers than I have. And if they really wanted to reverse engineer what I'm doing, they just open an account and see what it does and do it in their own code base.
To some extent, there's no technical defensibility here, really, that's worth worrying about. So that, but then again, this comes back to Hendrik's point about, like, is it like, okay, so from our language, is it the practices of universal governance that we're working on? Is that really what matters, right? And is the tool just a way of getting that out into the world? And therefore, it's really the underlying theory, philosophy, and set of practices that you want people to adopt. And you say, hey, well, here's one way you can adopt them, but also you can just take the work that we're publishing on this and then operationalize them in your own I think that's a really nice way to frame how to move through some of this decisioning.
I really like that, actually. And to answer another part of your question there was like the tool or the network, right? So for me, it is all about come for the tool, stay for the network. I want to build a tool that's extremely useful in a wide variety of settings, like something that people would be willing to get on their phones and their computers and work with in the context of their employment company, but also in the context of their friends and their extended families, and their, that this could be something that actually could be useful sort of in the same way that Facebook is actually useful to people because it allows them to stay connected and stuff. So this would be like the ability for groups of any size to coordinate better, make better decisions, have better access to the sense-making functions. So it's not either or, like there's that tool for sure, but then there's also the network of coordination. And that's the initial impetus for this, is like, I want to create a tool that enables networked coordination. So it's not really like it's one or the other, it's really both. And while I'm focusing on making the tool more useful for companies, for organizations like Q1, I'm doing it because of the revelation that I had that corporate governance has evolved a lot more quickly than government governance. And so there are functions that we find in corporate structures that are more adaptive than the old code that's being run in the US government that was developed in 1776 or whatever. So see it both ways. I see it as like, this will be useful in opening up the possibility, to a more transparent and wise governance, in companies and in other organizations, but also in the world. So yeah,
Joe.
I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I want to start with one question. Why has somebody like Microsoft, why did they not just buy WordPress 10 years ago when they realized that it was going to be something? That's not the main point I want to make. That's just something that's popped into my head. This conversation around the difference between the tool and the network, is there a way that you could deliberately limit the tool? What about if Dropbox was limited to 10 gig or whatever it might be? Like, we would be forced to make very different decisions about how many photographs we keep. We wouldn't just keep all of them. Maybe similarly with something like Facebook, right? If the game was not to simply accumulate as many friends as possible, if you were topped out at, let's just use the Dunbar number as a start point here. But if you were topped out at 120 or 150 friends, how would Facebook be different? And is that useful? If what you're getting at here, Sam, is the idea that at some point, if this idea starts to gain traction, that a big company driven by the wrong incentives is just going to come and steamroller this and divert it into something that's not what you mean. Could you consciously, deliberately limit the tool in some way to prevent that happening? And it's rather than just grow as much as you can. It's more like, it's more like scaling out than scaling up, right? It's more like an oak tree dropping acorns, or, blowing on a dandelion and just kind of waiting to see where the seeds land and whether they actually take root anywhere or not.
I just want to address a few things that you said there, Joe. Thanks. So one of the things that I get a lot is this tension between like community groups. Like, we're built as human beings to be in groups of sub Dunbar size, right? And so it feels good to us. It feels natural, and like we understand how everybody feels. And when someone puts a thumbs up, we know what they mean because we know them. and we know, how they communicate and how they interact. And there was a lot of tension in the beginning with Forby to, like, a lot of people that were involved really wanted to push Forby towards being useful for that use case. But what I've done is I've broken down how interactions happen in small, intimate groups and in large anonymous groups. So you have WhatsApp and Discord and things like that for smaller groups, and Slack for medium-sized, and then you have like Twitter for really large groups. And the way a thumbs up works is very different in all of those organizations. And so I want to be useful for both groups, but one thing is I don't want to just be useful for small groups, because we have to be able to coordinate at the scale that we affect things. And so if we're continually designing for our ability to coordinate in groups that feel natural to us and feel, healthy to us, we're not going to design for being able to scale, be able to coordinate at the level of the world. And it's a different animal, and it requires a different interface and different tools. But we need to do it, because if one group decides to burn coal, that mercury goes everywhere. And mercury is a neurotoxin, and it never goes away, and it'll be here forever. And so we need to be able to coordinate around that multipolar trap. It's so useful to burn coal, so much energy, so helpful for making steel and heating houses and all that stuff. But it's freaking toxic. And so if we don't figure out how to coordinate at that scale in a way that has the traction of everybody, then it's just going to keep getting burned until it's used up, And so that's part of the answer there. But one of the things that you said, I think, might be a good question for Arend is, what if we open part of the source code? Like, what if we open the small community group source code, but kept like the code that was useful for bigger companies? For example, the nested communities, like the code that's being used, like the governance structures that are used in Nestor and in TalkSpirit, HoloSpirit. Like, what if we kept that as a plugin or an add-on that we kept closed, but we kept the main code available for open, something like that? That's kind of what I was thinking about as Joe was talking.
I think it's a super valid perspective, but I also think it depends on what is the intention, because as Henrik was putting it, we live in a world where when something new gets developed, the 800-pound gorilla is going to come along and take it, right? In whatever way that ends up happening, there will be it will. So the technical defensibility doesn't seem to be really the issue, at least from my perspective, given what we're working through together. But again, I come back, like, if there was something like a first principle from which we were engaging in this dialogue, it's kind of like, what is the real intention here? Like, we know there are many. It's like we know that our capacity to collectively coordinate in kind of like normative ways is really important. Like, we've got no chance of making it in anything like a semi or complex global civilization if we don't move towards that. We kind of get that, but like, what's the real intention? And I think if that is described perhaps with more specificity or clarity or whatever it is, then some of these actions that we're exploring, which I think all have validity for different reasons, like, there's not been an idea that someone's proposed that isn't like kind of like valid, or a curiosity that's not valid. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's what I'm feeling really drawn to at the moment, is what is the ground of Forby's being, to use that sort of frame.
Yeah, and it really is in opening the possibility space for bringing power to wisdom, and bringing power to to transparency, and opening the Overton window for the possibility of a new form of governance. And so I think, like, ultimately, if that is the goal, I think from what I'm gathering here, it does seem to me that open source kind of does have some advantages in that, like all of these things listed here, in that it could scale more quickly. And there may be some use cases where people are diluting the network effect, but that dilution may not be the norm. It might be the exception. And also, through interoperability protocols, we may be able to reduce that dilution effect. I still have this fear that, like somebody, because the truth is I'm not that good at this. Like, I'm doing it because I feel the need to do it. And I'm trying to create a model that has the ability to scale, even though, I'm not, like, it's all sort of new to me. But my fear is that somebody with better chops could just take the code and do exactly what I'm doing and just put a different brand on it and sell it better than I'm selling Forby. And then it's just like, well, goodbye the last 4 years of my life, goodbye, the 100,000 that I spent on the code. And so that's part of the fear that I have as well. Hendrik, you have a response at their end?
Appreciate that. Yeah, that's probably the last question on my mind, then I'll probably head out soon after. But so some of the benefits there, like many contributors and getting volunteers and being able to kind of like grow your community that way. I'm curious how you feel about the overhead that comes with that, because if you get a lot of people interested in the project and are helping you out, that also means there's some level of management that you're committing to. People come with ideas, you're like, trying to direct those ideas or figure out which ones are good ones or which ones not. Sometimes that people come in with a lot of ideas that maybe are derailing or something that's like a priority for you for a long time in the future. There's sometimes volunteers will require training and don't necessarily stick around that long. So yeah, there's just a lot of overhead that comes with maintaining an open source community. The work isn't necessarily free. So I'm curious if you factor that into the equation.
Yeah, not enough. I haven't thought about it enough. I'm just imagining sort of like directional decisions being conversations that I'm having with volunteers, and code type decisions being done, that I'm paying, Salem, our developer, to kind of look through code and make those types of decisions. So you're right. It's not cheap. It's expensive when it comes to time, but it could be, there's the potential that it could be a great investment because, then with that comes, some great code and also, a vibrant community that's spreading the word about the tool. So yeah, it's a good question.
So, yeah, bigging on this. Let's go beyond it because I'm a friend of the commons. I live in that world. Because it's like go beyond the polarity. Like, what's the third option? And I think one of the exactly what you said. Like that is the way we're building organizations. I'm putting all my effort in it. Someone takes my idea and they do certain things better because they just are better at it than I am. And I don't get anything from it. Versus building a venture inside of a commons architecture means you still get a piece of the pie, but it's not as big as if you would do everything because they're also putting effort and making it successful, but there's still something flowing back to you.
How does that work?
How does that work? Okay.
Yeah.
So we're working on fractional IP sharing. We have colleagues already who do this in the media scene, and where they use Web3 protocols to do that on digital products, and they figured that out already. Like they're working with Warner Brothers and the big media and Sony studios to fractionalize contributions to media products, so that the media product then can be thrown out into the world and people pay. And then automatically money gets distributed depending on the tokenization of the contribution that you had to that product.
So that they figured out contribution attribution in a particular context, and we're talking about
on-chain for media products. There's some really cool shit going on. Because we're recording, I'm not naming some names, but I can give you more names. But I want to honor some privacy here, and we have them in our network, right? Like that's in Quorum 1, for example. That's the whole intent we're moving towards. While we're also saying we're not there yet. What we are fractionalizing right now is human capital contribution, and we're working on external consulting products to finance everybody, because we realized the biggest issue we have in order to deploy more of our energy towards working on other projects like this is that everybody needs enough money in their bank account in order to be free to actually contribute to this, especially the ones who are really good. We have a fractionalized equity model. So that's the ref token that we created and the ref point, which is like future revenue share, but it's capped. The whole reason why it's capped is to fix the whole endlessly dependency we created with the stock market, right? I own it, right? That you named that in your beginning. So you power with money and then keep power infinitely because you bought it once. But actually say you get, I put money in and then I get more money back because I'm taking the risk, but there's an end date to it, which is all like capped. It's always capped in capped returns. They're either loan models that you have a loan agreement, or we are now working on, we already solved that. We raised $700,000 into a revenue share token, and we're distributing the first percentage of revenue this quarter. It's like very tiny, but it's working, and we proved it works. So now we can deploy it more. But so there are different parts that you need to figure out. Our whole intent is by end of the year is that you build your product within the shared legal entity, but you as a contributor own the whole IP of what the project that you're working on. But then you can say, I'm actually making this IP open to the community in that container of the commons, not to everybody out there in the world, but everybody who is also building in this shared architecture can use my IP to sell it better, do better, and then you get a share of, you own a part of the whole pie, but they're also, you define what people then give to you back in order for them to use yours. So do you have more flexibility, but it's constrained within this community. We're not there yet. I'm very, very, be very honest. And I know, Val, I would be curious to hear, you guys on my list with MetaGov, and Christine is part of our crew now as well, and she linked us up. I know there are other groups that work on this commons network. There are some data commons groups that work on saying we have a shared code stack, and whoever is part of the shared stack can use, it's open source within this community, but it's not outside. Everybody who's outside and uses any of our code needs to pay. But if you're inside of this stack and you follow our principles and how we're collaborating with each other, which is this, tends to be this fractional sharing, then you're, and that's all that's this, how do you create, how do you make code bases a commons? And a commons is not the strategy of the commons. I'm not talking about that. I think you guys also know the peer-to-peer foundation and stuff. When I talk commons means shared resources that are governed by the people who are using these resources together. That's a commons for me. It's not everybody goes this. No, we're the planet is a commons for me, and we need to figure out how we as human species who are the consciously influencing it govern this together. It's not the perspective how we do this.
I like the idea. I like this model of having, I think of the commons, I think of the forest in a village in, medieval England or something. And, and so everyone could go in there and take some firewood, but you wouldn't want somebody from, 3 villages over coming in, cutting out a bunch of trees. It's kind of like commons to the people of that village in a sense. So,
because we're in that place, and if someone comes and wants to contribute it, we have our rules and we notice together how is the forest doing, and as long as the forest is fine, just go there and get trees. But if we as a community notice, we're using too many trees, or we have an expert, someone who takes care of the forest for us, who's an expert in noticing that, he informs us. Right, that's the whole problem around decision making with the, there's everybody needs to decide everything. It's not going to work. We're already overloaded. So I want some person who knows this, but they need to inform us, and we then get informed and say yes or no, or okay, let's adjust. Or we hear other needs, the whole, the Australians in the room, that's why Dave Snowden's work around sense making and meaning making it's more which data are we using to inform the decision making, and then how much liberty we give, right? And that's more collecting perspectives and stories, and then let people. It's just different data we use. What informs our decision making? And what are we optimizing for? Those are kind of the questions that go hand in hand. Right now, reason I said let's beta test, and why Hank and I are both excited about what you've built, is because it enables our very we now fractionalized venture building already right now for external ventures, because we still need to figure out the legal aspect. We figured out the revenue share aspect for the whole. We haven't figured out how to fractionalize it down, but we will figure that out in the next year and a half with lawyers, maybe faster if we get more capital to pay the lawyers. But it is about ultimately this nested system approach, and that's what you're also thinking about and how you architected Forby, right? It's people need to make a decision in a small group like us. There needs to be the team or the larger whole, but it also, the decision making needs to be meeting the problems on that level of systems complexity, and then you need the correct data informing that, and then trickling down. I'm drifting off in a different direction, but ultimately, where I'm going here with you, and what helped me a lot to understand this, where Quorum One is at, or where I'm personally contributing to, is the 2-loop model. Have you heard of that framework?
No.
So it's a change model. There's the existing system that exists, and you have the people who are in there, and then here's mainstream, and then it's dying. And then you have a new model that's underneath. They don't touch. In the peak of the old model, the new model is born, and then you have early movers that then birth the new model. And then there's the moment where the people jump over into the other model, the old one dies, and you flip over. That's the Buckminster Fuller code, create a system that makes the old one obsolete. So, but you need in the old model, you need people who prepare the soil for people to make the jump. I worked in large system change with government and large organizations. I realized that my colleagues do a lot of ultimately hospice work these days, helping the people within this organization to come at peace with it, that the way they're doing work is dying.
It's hospicing
Which-
modernity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Big fan. Or you're part of the crew that your and attention is more attending to this new loop, which we don't know exactly yet how it looks like, but we have some things figured out. And if you want to work in the government sector, my personal recommendation is I see it. Go work with the bioregional movement. That's the replacement for government in the future. And then they're interested in using it. Or you say, I have some of the radical municipalities that have enough of, or governments, but then you need to only go to them, forget everybody else, just go to the radicals that say we want to organize differently. Or you say, I want to spread this idea of there's a possibility different, but then you will not do the completely different thing that you want to do. You will not do in the existing system. You can only do that with crazy ones like us who are like, yes, you actually figured out a part of the whole that we're trying to solve. We don't have a decentralized voting mechanism within our ecosystem yet. That is super cool. And we also say, you are not going to be the only one, at least not your tool. There are other tools, because if someone in the different community says it needs to be on chain, it needs to be Web3, then we need a Forby version that's on Web3. If that community says this is important to us, this is what we value for data security. So then the pattern gets translated somewhere else. But if it operates in a commons, then that's not a problem. You just get a smaller piece, but you still get a piece of the whole pie.
Yeah, I'm okay with a smaller piece of a bigger pie, for sure. As long as it's contributing to the movement of things towards the new system. I mean, the big piece of a big pie that's full of mercury and cadmium and like dying, like I don't want that pie. Like I'll take a tiny piece of a bioregional, organic permaculture pie any day. I worked in organic farms when I got out of high school, like it's where my heart is. So yeah, so that's what I want to support.
And this is again just coming, that's a specific example, and the bioregional movement is not like it's new, right? It's like there's actually 50 plus years of quality momentum there, but it's starting to reach into the Overton. Like I think that's why we're seeing so much attention. But like again, this coming back to the point about sort of like the intentionality, directionality, etc. I think there is, by honing in, by being like by again tapping into some more sort of specificity, it's kind of like I think some of these things can become clearer. Because if, for instance, you said, all right, part of my theory of change is aligned to what Henrik said, bioregional governance over some time through whatever means, whatever processes, in a bend not break type fashion, is going to be what in that sort of two loop model replaces the government structures that we have now, right? Whether that's right, wrong, and I'm indifferent to that right now. But like, let's just say that was the hypothesis, and you have to have working hypotheses for strategy, for organizational theory, yada yada yada. Like, it could just be, all right, the tool is for that. The tool is to help. Again, I'm just using the example, but the bioregional movement, like radically effectively govern.
Yeah.
In kind of like the right ways, so that becomes the new model for how we live above social foundations within planetary boundaries, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, again, it's just an example, but something like that is so targeted that, and Forby could be used so effectively, like very quickly in those contexts. And those folks, because, at least the folks that I know in those movements, even the high profile ones, right? I don't believe they're using any tooling for the way that they do. They talk a lot about bioregional governance. I don't think they're using any tooling at the moment. You know what I mean? So I'm just like coming back to the intentionality, directionality, and kind of like the strategy. I think there's maybe a stepping, because this has been incredibly illuminating. There's a bit of a stepping back. Where is the target for this? Like, where is the valid target for this? The impactful target for this? The values aligned target for this? Where is there proper momentum that can be tapped into? Where is there actual willingness to embrace something like this? Because using, in order to use this tool, you kind of already have to embrace the sort of philosophy. Like, if you're in a top-down command control system of oppression type structure, like, this is not of interest to you. This is a threat to you. Do you know what I mean? So where is the momentum? Where is the willingness? Where maybe could we direct this? Like, I don't know. That's where I'm continually coming back to.
Yeah. And would making this open source open those doors more quickly than a closed source for-profit model? I mean, MetaGov uses Slack, a for-profit closed source model. We all are using it. We all use Zoom. While we are all aligned with the principles of nonprofit and open source, the fact is that closed source for-profit produces better products in the long run. That's the root of the conundrum, of course, here.
But I'm thinking,
I don't know if that's true, Sam. That's a hypothesis you're having. The
It's a
most
hypothesis,
reason
indeed.
we're using Slack is because our client systems are using Slack. Right? And it's optimized for commercial client work. And then we can link our enterprise Slack with each of our client Slacks, and then it's easier to communicate with the client system that we're operating. Right? So it's always
there's lock-in effects, right? It's
yeah, but
Network,
it's like I'm the non-for-profit open closed source. For me, this is like a arbitrary binary that we're drawing, and like understanding that is currently that is grown out of how we used to do things. If we're now coming from a radical new place, then these are just tools to use. It's like law is like Lego, and we use law now always to build Lego houses. And I was like, I want to build a jungle with Lego. Let's build a jungle. How do I play Lego with that? And the same thing is with code structures and licensing structures. How do you build that's why it always comes back, and Nate, thank you for going back there. It's what's your intent?
Yeah.
And then use these the legal tooling, and then that's why, right? Like, that's why the whole DAO movement, it builds legal structures in Liechtenstein, because their legal constraints are. Liechtenstein has become the hub for these radical places because people went there to hide their money. And because they wanted to hide their money, they needed foundation legal structures that are very adaptable. Now we're using this, which I think is very unethical and shitty, but we're using what they created and use it to build more ethical structures. That's why we're going into that place, because we have the legal freedom to actually plug and play and build like structures on chain, because we are no longer needing the national law system to build the trust. We now have the blockchain to enable the trust. The whole Web3 movement is replacing trust by your national legal system is protecting you. No, the code is protecting me. I have more trust in the code than in the legal system. That's what Web3 and chain does. So we can find the plug and play that meets your truth easy. And they're not like just looking at the people in the room. We will find a way. So don't get stuck in the is this or that. Get first clear as like what's the main intent, and then we find the thing that meets the context and the client system. That's step 2. Who do you want to serve?
Okay, so the next step for me is to figure out how to make open source work. That's the next step for me. You guys understand my purpose. My purpose is, there's a couple of purposes here, but certainly like opening the Overton window, making the possibility of, transparent governance on a worldwide scale is the top thing. And, under that, there's a number of other motivations as well. I want to build something functional that serves its members, that models a new way of managing business through the governance community model. I don't want to just build another thing that's just like everything else. I want to build something that actually uses the principles of good governance. And I think if we find a way to get down into the nitty-gritty, what open source model, what license would we use? How much of the code would be opened? Would we open the front end and the back end, or just the back end? Would we open the entire back end? When would we consider building interoperability protocols? Like, how would the cost of that be borne out? Those types of things. Like, if there's some way that if people are willing to engage in that dialogue with me about how to do this in a way that is in alignment with all the values and motives of Forby, then I want to do it. Like that's what I want to do. So
Hi, can I jump in quickly? Just on
yeah,
that, I think what I appreciate most about this conversation is the fact that it's happening and like it's really novel, and to me like it's really exciting to feel part of Forby, and though I'm not on a community that uses it yet, or I
nobody
haven't
is
really.
yet.
Yeah, well, that's like what I keep coming back to, wanting to hear from the people who are touching it, who are in there, who are using it. And it was really helpful to hear, Hendrik, like even, that you uh yeah, are like seeing the tool as like useful or potentially useful because it matches with the way that you're already organizing within your community. And I sense that about 4B, but I think like just to highlight what you just said, Sam, which is like being part of these continuing conversations. Like you're doing the thing by hosting these, you're doing the thing. And so as you release the tool and people use it, and those are going to be the people you're going to want to hear from, and to keep having these conversations in ways that include those people. Us, like I definitely, am excited to play with the tool with MetaGov, and yeah, I think that spaces like this are, and if we can do this on Forby, like I think that kind of like incorporation of the tool into useful, like tangible things, and then getting those people to keep building the tool. That's like when Hendrik was speaking, I was thinking a lot about commons, and there's working groups in MetaGov who study this stuff. I'm not the expert, but like that, there are a lot of ways to contribute. Commons, literally, it's shared resources, but it's like some people might have money to share and put towards something. Other people might have labor and time. Other people might have community care, and like there's like lots, or data, right? Like information. There's like lots of ways of adding value into the 4B ecosystem, and so I think like as that grows, as people use it, as people contribute to it, as people give you ideas, as you do stuff like this and record this, like us being here is contributing, right? So kind of like 4B is a place where people are, is already a commons if you're like recognizing the value of the diversity of ways that people are contributing to it, and figuring out how to capture, not capture in a bad way, capture it, like record it and build it into the DNA of the organization. That's where your answers will be. So yeah, I don't know if
Yeah,
that's helpful, but it kind of, this conversation is
absolutely.
really exciting and illuminating, and yeah, that's what I have for now. But want to be a part
Yeah,
of more.
I really appreciate that, and what I'm taking from what you're saying, like that this is indeed an ongoing process, and the fact that you have opened the space for this ongoing process. Like we don't have to make a decision today, obviously, but the decision will be informed by people like you who care and are insightful and who are willing to have these conversations. So yeah, indeed, like this isn't finished. This is just getting started, and this will indeed be posted and edited and stuff taken out of it, but it'll be this will be the first, and I think we'll have a few more of these. The first one wasn't recorded, thanks to me.
I'll just say something quickly, and then I'm going to have to jump. An attempt to synthesize to some hopefully useful extent, like where I am feeling like I've gotten to here is something along the lines of pushing some of the personal motivations to the side. Like you care for the state of the world, you have children, you want biospheric conditions and social and economic and political conditions to mean a livable future for like all of that stuff, right? Just pushing that to the side for a moment, but without pushing to the side its critical importance. To me, it feels like the 8 universal practices of governance, that's what we're motivated to see in the world. And we think that Forby is a way of helping them come to life and evolve. If those two premises are kind of correct, then I think there is a question of, okay, where does Forby first target its attention in order to start making that happen? And I think for me, just personally, that's the biggest thing that's come out of this, is that's the thing that really matters. Because you could start with just a normal corporate structure, just go down that path, right? And then show value in a really targeted way, right? Evolve the thing. And then as there's actually momentum, as there becomes capital available, et cetera, do whatever, I don't know, elaborate, or maybe it's simple, I'm not sure because this is unknown, structure to properly enable that to move forward. But it does feel to me to some extent that we're unnecessarily complicating in the sort of short term, and that these things are more longer term considerations. But I think what probably matters most is getting Forby as the kind of like the thing that helps people bring the 8 universal practices of governance to life, so that we can demonstrate the usefulness of those 8 universal practices relative to the way that governance in human context occurs today.
Yeah.
So that we can report on how that's playing out and showcase that Forby is one way through which that can be done. And from there, like, it's like, wow, like, you know, the possibility space massively opens. And that's not to say all the long-term stuff doesn't matter. Of course it does. But I feel like maybe coming back a little closer, sort of 3, 6, 12 months, and being like radically focused on that type of thing. That's just what I'm sort of feeling through these conversations. Other than obviously appreciation and gratitude and the fact that there's a lot of useful stuff.
Yeah. No, what I'm getting from what you're saying is, at the end of the day, it's having a system that models these beneficial methods of governance, and having that actually get into the hands of people in the short term is step number 1. I think that's kind of what I'm taking from.
Yeah, that's what I'm feeling. And then it's like, once we know it's working, right, then it's kind of like, whoa, okay, we can really draw on, like, we can actualize many different forms of potential. But at the moment, the potential that we have to actualize is the people are using the thing, and it brings to life the 8 universal practices, and those 8 universal practices, by using the thing, actually help us make better decisions that have better outcomes, etc., etc.
Yeah. Okay, so to be continued. I think that's the gist of what everyone's saying.
For sure.
Like, I do want to engage the strategic planning of how we manage the code base and other things further. Like, that these are conversations that have gotten to a certain point, and there's some possibilities here, but we don't need to make any decisions right now. The intention is, I think, fairly clear, and I think it's a matter of how do we get from here to there. And the first step really is to start having people get on there, and then have those people engage in this conversation more so. So yeah, maybe we put the cart before the horse here in having these conversations, but at least we open the door. Okay, good, thumbs up from Val. That's great. And to be continued. Like, again, thanks to everybody who's listening, here in the future, and who knows where, and looking forward to engaging with you in this process in the future. So thank you so much, everybody. Peace out. Love you all, and I'll send you a link. Thanks.
Bring back the 70s, yeah.
That's my era.
Bye, mate.